Games Explained. My name is Caleb Denby, of course filling in for Jim McLaughlin these past few weeks due to the COVID concerns. And today I wanted to go over the Caro-Kann. And more specifically, I wanted to start with the advanced variation in the Caro-Kann. It's one of the most testing lines, and it's definitely where a lot of the tricks lie for Black to deal with. So to jump right in, I wanted to go over a game between Gawain Jones and Jeffery Xiong. And this was a game that was actually played last year right here at the St. Louis Chess Club in, I believe, the Summer Classic. This game, of course, started off with e4, c6, d4, and d5. This is, of course, the main starting position in the Caro-Kann. Black first plays c6, and then stakes his claim in the center with the move d5. White, however, gets these two strong central pawns, and will look to use the central advantage to gain some space, and perhaps even launch an attack against the black king side. So today, to start with, we're looking at the advanced variation. This is kind of the most testing line against the Caro-Kann that I've really found. This is the one that has given me the most problems, and it's one of the ones where White is kind of trying to get everything. There's the exchange Caro-Kann, where White takes on d5, and here both players end up with one real big claim in the center. There's the classical Caro-Kann with knight c3, where you still get rid of this e4 pawn. White does have a small central advantage here on d4, but it's on a half-open file. It's a little bit more easily attacked. But with e5, White is saying, I want both of these central pawns, and I want to keep the position closed in the center, and then launch an attack, perhaps on the king's side. So today, in this game, Jeffery Xiong chose bishop f5, and this is the line that I'm going to recommend. It's the most natural way to play with black, and you'll notice that we get the bishop out before playing e6. This is the big difference between the Caro-Kann and the French. Now, in the game, Gawain Jones chose a fairly tricky line with the move h4. So who thinks they see the threat if black plays e6? Who has the threat here? Who knows? Who knows what's going on? I assume everybody knows. Of course, with h4, White is actually making a very sneaky threat to play the move h5, taking away the bishop's last safe square. So the move g4 here is, in fact, going to end up trapping this bishop one way or another, with all of these squares under White's control. So after h4, Black has to make a pretty difficult decision. There's a few options here for Black to deal with this threat. Really, the only thing you can't do is play e6. The move I'm going to recommend is actually h5. And for a long time, h6 was the main move here, just getting ready to tuck the bishop back on h7. But more recently, in modern chess, I think the move h5 has a slightly better reputation. And the reason for that is you just don't give White quite so much space on the king's side. Against h6, White can still continue with this move g4, and then say you drop this bishop back, White can even begin doing things like e6 if you're not too careful. But the move h5 I like quite a bit. It controls the g4 square. It lets this bishop sit on the nice f5 square for just a few moments longer, and doesn't give White what he really wants. In this game, Gawain Jones chose a pretty interesting line that has recently been pretty critical. He chose to play the move bishop d3, and this, at first glance, seems to be a pretty advantageous trade for Black. This is White's strong bishop. The central pawns are on dark squares, and this bishop would be a monster on d3, if not for this black bishop on f5. So Black is usually happy to take off these bishops, and that does remain the case here. But White has actually achieved something in this opening, and that is, if Black plays the move e6 here, well, the move bishop g5 is actually going to be a pretty big annoyance for Black to deal with. This bishop's hard to kick out of the g5 square now that we've committed our pawn to h5. And for that reason, I'm actually not going to recommend the move e6 in this position. It's the most common move, it's the most popular move, and very strong players have played it, such as Peter Svidler, Artemeyev, Dave Navarre even, I'm seeing in the database. but the move I'm going to recommend is the move that was played in this game, and that move is Queen A5 check. And who thinks they see the idea of Queen A5 check after Bishop D2? What does Black want if White simply kicks this queen away? What is Black trying to do here? What is Black trying to achieve? Why give this seemingly unimportant check, drawing the bishop out to D2? What's the purpose? Yeah, Thiago Potter has it right. The move is Queen A6 here. And the point for Black is White has made a lot of concessions in pushing these pawns so far up the board. And if Black can get the queens off the board, well, then he really isn't going to have too many problems in any type of endgame. For example, if Queen takes A6 were played, simply Knight takes A6, and we can imagine White develops calmly, and something like E6, and well, this is going to be a pretty comfortable position for Black. If anything, Black is the one who stands a bit better due to this slightly weak pawn on D4. You can imagine C5 coming through, and maybe some pressure on this C file for Black. Now, notably, that this is a pretty common line still for White, playing Bishop D2 here, but White must play the move E6 if he wants to play like this. And the point is, he's getting rid of this super far advanced central pawn, which could turn out to be a weakness, and breaking up the Black pieces just a bit. So the game might continue something like Queen takes D3, E takes F7 check, King takes F7, C takes D3, and now Black is still going to just simply develop. But the point for White is he still has a couple squares. Black, however, is shown to be doing totally fine in this endgame. So that's the point of Queen A5 check. The natural Bishop D2 seemingly doesn't give Black any problems, because after Queen A6, White really doesn't have a comfortable way to avoid the queen trade. That's why in this game, White played Knight D2. And this is a pretty logical move now. So who, once again, if I can ask, sees the point, why is Knight D2 a better move than Bishop D2 in this case? Although, okay, maybe not necessarily better, but a better try, perhaps. What's the point of Knight D2 versus Bishop D2? It seems like Bishop D2 is much more natural. You gain this tempo on the queen. But the problem, of course, was Queen A6. I'll give the chat a moment here. Give the chat a moment. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody in the chat getting it, but I'm sure there's some delay. So I'm going to give the answer now, and hopefully you guys at home have had long enough to think. The point is, after Queen A6, White has an additional option here. And yeah, General Gaming did get it, as well as Tarek. So Queen A6 offering the queen shade. Well, now the difference is this knight on D2 helps support this C4 square, and the move C4 is going to be a very comfortable way for White to avoid this trade. Now this queen is just a little bit out of play. Actually on A6, it's not putting any pressure on this diagonal, and the diagonal is going to stay blocked until White decides to open it. So after Knight D2, Queen A6 is actually a little bit of a misstep, and Jeffery Xiong in the game simply continued with E6. White now plays Knight F3, getting developed, and Black is finally done doing this tricky business. Oh, and I should mention, the whole point of Queen A5 check, forcing Knight D2, well, not really forcing, but baiting White into playing Knight D2, is now, of course, this bishop can't get out to the strong G5 square. This is the nuance in Black's play so far. This bishop being blocked on C1 makes it significantly worse than it would be on this G5 square. So now Black is pretty much free to just develop normally, as he did in the game. Jeffery played Knight H6, White castled, Black now plays Knight F5. This is a great square for the knight. It eyes both weak pawns in the White camp, and with H5, preventing G4, this knight is going to be pretty stable on this nice outpost. White now tried Knight B3 in the game, hitting this queen. We see Queen A6. Now that White has castled, he can more comfortably prevent this queen trade with a move like Queen D1. Note that if he had tried Queen D1 in the previous lines we had looked at, the king gets rather stuck on the E1 square with this Black queen preventing castling. Now, Black simply plays knight d7, taking control of the c5 square, preparing to break. And now after bishop f4, bishop e7 hits this pawn, g3, we see rook c8, preparing this break even more, c3, and then c5. And Black has more than comfortably survived this opening and is looking at a good game ahead, which I'll take you through kind of what happened in this game so you just get an idea for more of the middle game plans. But this is where I'm claiming the opening is more or less over. And so let's kind of stop and take stock of this position and see what's going on and see which player should be happier with their opening decisions. If we look from the Black side, this is a very strong knight on f5. It puts pressure on h4. White has been forced to play the move g3 to defend it. It also puts pressure on d4, which is the square that Black is kind of ganging up on now with the move c5. His bishop is on a perfectly natural square on e7. This knight is nice on d7, supporting c5, pressuring this square as well, even potentially coming into some queenside squares. And lastly, this queen, well, I guess not lastly, this queen is on a perfectly fine square on a6, puts some pressure on this diagonal, puts some pressure on a2. And lastly, the rooks and the king are both in perfectly fine spots. Black should be pretty comfortable castling kingside in this game, perhaps after a move like g6, but he doesn't even have to commit to that thanks to how closed this e-file is in the center. So this rook is useful. This rook can later come into the game after castles, and all of Black's pieces have a purpose. Black doesn't have any major weaknesses, and so Black is looking to be very comfortable. Meanwhile, from the White point of view, honestly, these knights feel just a little bit disjointed on opposite sides of the board. This bishop on f4 doesn't make a great impression either, and White is looking at some long-term weaknesses on both sides of the board here, with the d4 pawn being slightly weak. h4 ideas are still going to be in the air. You could even imagine at a later date Black breaking with moves like f6 and g5 potentially. And this queen side is also going to be in Black's favor due to the placement of this queen. So I think, honestly, Black has nothing to worry about here. In fact, I would much prefer to have the Black pieces from this opening position. And White, honestly, hasn't done too much wrong. So that goes to show you, I think this is really the best way for Black to play against this line. And I think this is a pretty comfortable position. You're welcome to disagree with me, but I quite like this position. So, in the game, Gawain Jones tried a4, taking a little bit more of this queenside space, trying to relieve some pressure on the a2 pawn. Jeffery played queen b6, keeping an eye on some squares that the a pawn just vacated. Rook a2 now, and Jeffery plays a6. White finally flinches first on the c5 square and captures here, and Black actually takes this back with the bishop. We're not at all really concerned with knight takes bishop and knight takes knight, because the Black knights are going to have some nice squares in this game. This knight already on a good square. The knight from c5 can look at squares like e4, can look at squares like b3, and it can potentially even reroute back to d7 to put more pressure here and come to more squares. So king g2 was played in the game, just a nice improving move, and now we see both players start to do some maneuvering. Jeffery plays knight f8. Perhaps this wasn't the best move. The engine, and I agree, recommends a5. And the point here is you simply prevent White from playing a5 himself and take a little bit more of a firmer grasp on this queen side. Regardless, though, knight f8 is not a horrible move by any means. White does play a5, and now after queen b5, we start to see some exchanges. Knight takes bishop, rook takes knight, and now rook e1. This knight does come out to g6. Like I said, more pressure over here as well. Now bishop e3, rook back to c8, bishop b6. Actually, knight back to e7. So we see a little bit of a funny dance here. The knight preparing to come to c6 perhaps. Knight d4 now, queen back to d7, and rook a3. And you can kind of see White's play might look nice, but he's actually making no progress towards any real plans. We see this bishop come into b6, but what does it really do? We see a knight come to d4, but there's just no targets for White to really target in this position. So the game continued. Rook c4, queen f3, queen c8, rook d1, and g6, a nice solidifying move. This move was kind of always going to be played eventually. b4 now from white. We see castles, bishop back to c5, rook e8, and now we see another trade. And this game eventually just kind of fizzled out into nothing. Queen e3, queen c7, rook e1, rook c8, and you can kind of tell that it's really Jeffery putting all the pressure on here with these this tripling on the c-file. Unfortunately for him, it was not enough in the game. After queen f4, we simply see a trade of the knights, and now this game wrapped up pretty quickly with more piece trades to come. White tried this move, g4, to get at the black king, but it was not enough. And we see eventually this repetition to end the game. So this was a really nice game by Jeffery. It, especially in the opening, I want to say. His opening play was particularly impressive, and the reason for that is it really never felt like black was under any pressure at all in this game. And I think that's down to this nice nuance here, where you play queen a5 check to prevent this bishop from landing on g5. I did see a question earlier about what's the big deal with bishop g5, why not just bishop e7? And the reason is simply knight f3. You definitely don't want to be taking this bishop, because the move h takes is going to be strong, g6 is now threatened, and you're giving up a lot of squares like this. g4 is also going to come if you play a move like g6, and this is going to be devastating. So the point is, white can just let this bishop sit here, and it's going to be a little bit awkward for black to develop around this. You know, you can leave this bishop sitting here, but it's never really threatening to trade on g5, and it just makes development a little bit more awkward. So why not throw in queen a5 check, bring this knight to d2, and keep this bishop planted on the c1 square. With that in mind, any other questions on this game? I don't think I saw too much confusion there. So why don't we just go ahead and take a look at the next line I wanted to look at. This was a game between Alexey Shirov and Anatoly Karpov, and it was, let's see, this one was a pretty natural development game. This is the line that I'm calling the most natural development for both sides in the Caro-Kann Advanced variation. And if you're not super booked up on the opening with the white pieces, as a lot of people aren't, this is probably how a lot of the games are going to go for you. I know from personal experience, a lot of my games in the advance kind of end up looking something like this, where both sides just develop pretty naturally, and then it turns into a game. So why don't we see what happened here? Shirov played e4, c6, d4, d5, and e5, of course, entering the advanced Caro-Kann. Bishop f5 from black. Once again, I recommend this move over c5. c5 has a pretty good reputation these days, but I just don't trust it. You know, hanging your pawn like that, how dare you? Just develop your bishop. Knight f3. In this game, like I said, just natural development. White brings his pieces out. Black plays e6, opening up this bishop. White brings this bishop to e2, supporting this knight and getting ready to castle. Now c5, and in a moment we're going to look at the main line of the short variation, which is a little bit more testing, and that happens after bishop e3. But in this game I just wanted to examine castles as Shirov played. Now knight c6 puts more pressure on the d pawn. We see c3, now an exchange on d4, and knight g e7. And what we see here is the situation in the center is already pretty clarified. White just developed his pieces to natural squares. He's going to continue to do so, and black is now also bringing out his pieces to their most natural squares. We see a3, and now actually knight c8 from Anatoly Karpov. The point here being, you can reroute to the queen side from c8, and you're clearing off this e7 square for the bishop. Knight bd2, bishop e7, now we see b3, and simply a5. And already I think white has not given black any trouble at all in this game. Continued with bishop b2. This knight actually comes out to a7, perhaps not the square you're expecting, but it does support the queen's side from here. Now we see rook e1 and castles. And knight f1 from white is preparing to reroute and put a little bit more pressure on this bishop. We are still kind of in the opening here, but I wanted to pause once again and kind of take stock of what's going on. Once again, This game I'm calling the normal development type of game here, where White has really just brought his pieces out to natural squares. Oh, and we're back with the board. White has really just brought his pieces out to natural squares. And the point is, if White simply does this, Black can take his time, bring his bishop to the best square, bring out the knight, do this funny little dance with his knights, bring this knight back to b6 or up to a7 is also fine, and just develop his pieces. And what you end up with is usually a position that looks like this, where the c-file is open, there's some possibilities for both sides on the queen side, and neither king is really in danger. So the point I'm trying to get across is, don't panic if your opponent plays some natural-looking move that you didn't actually prepare for specifically. You just develop your pieces, and more than likely, you're going to end up with a perfectly fine position, as Karpov did in this game. Now, Karpov simply brings this rook out to c8, getting on the open file. Knight g3 hits the bishop, bishop g6 moves the bishop. Now queen d2, queen b6, and we see that Black is already putting some pressure on these pawns. And once again, the dark squared bishop for White doesn't really leave a good impression. It's kind of a recurring problem for White in this advanced Caro-Kann. Bishop d1 now was White's choice, trying to defend this pawn. And Karpov plays in Karpovian style, very naturally, rook c7, guarding some squares and preparing to double. h4 now threatens to trap the bishop, so h6 comes on the board. Rook e2. Of course, Karpov continues with this plan and doubles. And we see from here, Black played a very nice game, taking total control of this c-file, and Karpov does eventually manage to convert this into a full point. Rook e3 comes on the board, now knight b5. Finally, this knight from a7 makes a bit more sense, hitting some key squares. Knight e2, guards some key squares, knight d7, and now knight h2 from White is slightly odd looking. Perhaps he's just preparing some ideas like this, opening up this diagonal a little bit more as well, and this knight can even come back to f1 in some cases, as well as up to g4 with some attacking ideas. Rook c6 by Karpov is guarding some squares on this 6th rank. It's slightly strange, though. I think this move is fine, but maybe not the most useful. Knight g4 now does threaten some things. Queen d8 is Karpov's choice, bringing the queen back to help defend just a bit. Rook h3 from White, now queen f8 from Black, and this is a very nice maneuver by Karpov, actually. The queen on the f8 square is doing a great job covering all these dark squares, but in addition to this, it's also going to be putting a ton of pressure on to a3. And this is what ends up giving Karpov a pretty nice edge here. No way to defend this pawn, so White must move it to a4. Now knight a3 comes on the board, and this once funny-looking knight that danced from g8 to e7 to c8 to a7 has come now all the way to the a3 square, and is putting some nasty pressure onto White. Things like knight c2 might be coming, with knight b4 to follow, and even knight d3, and we're well on our way to completing a knight's tour. Rather than allow that to happen, White actually captures this knight on a3, but now after takes, these squares have been softened up considerably, and Karpov manages to eventually invade. Rook g3 puts more pressure on this king, but now h5 keeps this pawn from coming any further, keeping things a bit more closed. Knight e3, bishop b2 is hitting this rook, rook a2 is forced, now bishop c1, and Karpov is making use of this c-file. Queen g5 comes on the board, queen b4 from Karpov, and you see now he's inching closer, preparing to invade. Knight f4 from Alexey Shirov is actually a critical mistake, and after bishop takes e3, fe3, rook c1, Shirov is simply losing this game. This bishop is falling. Knight takes g6 is not enough. Karpov takes this bishop, king h2, and we take back here, queen takes g6, and now queen e7. And Karpov is simply up a piece. They played a few more moves, rook f2, queen takes h4 check, and after the second rook fell, Alexey Shirov simply resigned, and Karpov won the game in the Caro-Kann. So, what's the point of this game? What should you take away from the opening? Well, the point is, the advanced Caro-Kann is not so scary in most cases. When white doesn't play a very few specific lines, if he just develops naturally, well then, both sides simply get developed, and black does not have anything to worry about. The goals here for black are normally just to control the C file, get a lot of pressure on the C file going, and make sure you don't get checkmated in the meantime. That's really white's only hope for a advantage in this line, is if somehow, some way, he gets some type of checkmate going. We saw Shirov go for it in the game, bringing both these knights forward, and even this rook up, but it's just not enough if you pay really close attention and make sure to not blunder anything. Okay. Was this a blitz game? I don't believe so, although they might have been in some time pressure by the end. Moving on from here, this, of course, was what I was calling normal development, and the key difference that we're going to look at in the next game is in this position, white castled, allowing black to play knight c6. In the next game, it's going to be the main line of the short variation, which is perhaps the best line for white in modern-day chess theory, where white goes bishop e3. So let's jump to that game now. This was a game between Dmitry, Jakovenko, and Pavel Eljanov. This game, of course, started in the Caro-Kann. Let me flip the board so you see it from the black point of view. E4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5 once again. Now, like I said, it's going to look pretty similar to the previous game with natural development. But now here, white plays this move, bishop e3. Of course, in the previous game, white played kingside castles. So what is the difference here? Well, the bishop on e3, of course, is pressuring this pawn on c5. So black no longer has the time to play a move like knight c6. We have to make decisions immediately. And there are a couple options here. Actually, in my personal games, for most of my career as a Caro-Kann player, I have played the move c takes d4, when after knight takes d4, you play knight e7, and this is a pretty forcing way of playing, and black is doing fine from what I've found from my personal Caro-Kann study, from my own repertoire. But lately, I've realized black just has a bit more fun with the move queen b6. You defend this pawn once again, and you put some nice pressure onto the b2 square. Now, white's main option by far is the only one we're going to look at here. That is knight c3. And now you have a kind of a funny position. Queen takes b2 has been tried before, but I think white actually does get quite a nice advantage here. Perhaps not from the line you would expect. The move here is actually going to be queen b1, a pretty strange looking move. If black dares to take this knight on c3, you're going to get met with bishop d2, when this queen is absolutely trapped and has to sacrifice itself. If you go out to a3 instead, well, queen takes b7, and you're losing your entire rook. Does not feel good. So instead, much more common is either queen b4 or queen takes b1, when after rook takes b1, in a move like c4, this rook is invading on b7. Pretty uncomfortable stuff. All of that is to say, the point of queen b6 isn't so much to directly capture this pawn on b2, but rather to help support the pressure on d4 without committing this pawn to actually capturing. So now, after queen b6, knight c3, black is totally fine playing the move knight c6 once again. And what was the point of all this? Well, we avoid these nasty lines where this knight comes out to d4 and we don't have the option to take it off the board. This is why we want to put the knight on c6 before capturing, to avoid this annoying knight d4. So that's why queen b6, knight c3, knight c6, I'm going to say is just a better line for black in most cases. Now, white can play a couple moves here. Kingside castles is totally possible. And now we might just actually take this pawn on b2, since we've developed our knight. You can also just play a simple move, like c4, clarifying the position in the center, and going for some queenside pressure as you would in kind of a French defense, kind of the same plans as the French here. Instead, though, in this game, Jakovenko played the move knight a4. This move attacks the queen, so I'm going to recommend you move it. This move is check, so I would recommend that one. feels good to play checks. Of course, white's only reasonable move here is to play c3, defending the knight and blocking the check. And now I'm going to recommend the move c4 here for black. And this is the move that really clarifies the structure of the game and is showing what black is committing to. So what's going to happen here? Well, black has given up his pressure on the d4 pawn, largely because white has done everything in his power to defend this pawn, supporting it no fewer than 4 times. What he gains by playing the move c4 is a little bit more control of these light squares. This bishop can now never really come to the d3 square. He also gains some nice queenside space on this b3 square as well. And it also, lastly, prevents white from playing c4 himself, pressuring the center. So after c4, once again, the plans are really going to revolve around the queen side for black. So expect black to look for moves like b5 and b4 later in the game. This is how black creates some weaknesses for white, creates some annoyances as well that he's going to have to look out for. Excuse me. So yeah, c4, a pretty nice move to clarify the structure. Once again, it kind of reveals black's hand that he's going to be playing for b5 and b4. We see castles, and black wastes no time. He plays simply b5 right away. Now this knight has nowhere to go besides the c5 square, and after knight c5, black is actually quite happy to take this knight off the board and go for this change in structure. So now, white has a couple pawn weaknesses to deal with, and this b4 move to look out for. What has he gained? Well, he has this nice d4 square. So we'll see in the game, he immediately makes use of it with knight d4. Black has a few options here. There are actually 2 games in this line to date. Knight takes d4 was played in one of the games, which is totally fine for black. a6 was played in this game, which keeps a little bit more pieces on the board and keeps a little bit more opportunities alive, I think, for both players. Rather than exchange these knights, which kind of clarifies things just a bit. Now this bishop is really a tall pawn, but it's a very, very useful pawn, so not too bad for white at all. Instead, a6 in this game, and white plays the move f4, trying once again to go for this type of kingside pawn storm, kingside attack. And as I said earlier, this is really the main way that white is going to try to fight for an advantage. Black is going for this play on the queen side. If white wants to win, he needs to counterattack on the king side. And that's what's going on here. So after f4, black plays a pretty nice move here, the move bishop e4. And now I will say the computer just wants to play b4 immediately, and this is pretty natural. You simply just gang up on the c3 pawn as quickly as possible. And for example, after g4, bishop e4 anyways, you can take on c3 next, so queen d2 defends it, takes and takes. And this is just going to be a pretty pleasant position for black after an exchange like this. Now that white has committed to so many weaknesses on the king side, we're a little bit happier taking this knight off the board, relieving some pressure on the f5 square, and highlighting these weak pawns for white. In the game, though, bishop e4 first, I think is a really nice prophylactic move. I'm not going to get mad at this move. It steps out of the way of g4, so now after g4, black can play any move he really desires. So bishop e4, queen d2 from white is supporting this pawn and also supporting the kingside attack. Black simply castles here. We're not super afraid of white's pawn storm, really. Bishop f3 comes on the board for white, forcing this bishop to make a decision. In the game, black simply captures, and after takes, we finally get this b4 move into play. And black really does just have a comfortable advantage here. The white play on the king side is just a bit too slow, and with this queenside advantage in space for black, b4 is a really, really nice move to activate all of his pieces. We saw rook h3 in the game. Black went for pawn takes c3, and after pawn takes c3, rook a b8. I will note that the computer really wants black to take on d4 and all of these positions and go for this position with this bishop stuck on this square. I don't think it makes a huge difference, as we saw in the game. Now, after queen c2, black plays h6. I actually would have preferred to see the move g6 here. It does weaken the dark squares a bit more, but it does control f5 quite comfortably. Now knight takes c6 is played. Knight takes c6. White brings more pieces to the king side, trying to attack, but it's simply much too slow. Queen a3 comes on the board, and there's not much white can do about black's invading here. So f5 is played, trying to go for checkmates, but now rook b2, queen d1, and queen takes c3. And this is far from the boring Caro-Kann that the chat seems to think the opening is about. You are going for a winning advantage on the queen's side at the expense of your king, allowing this scary-looking attack. But this is pretty typical for the Caro-Kann, actually, and also typical for the Caro-Kann is ending up winning the game. Of course, queen takes c3 has actually allowed a tactic. Bishop c1 attacks both the rook and the queen, but because black has gained so much so far on the queen's side, he's actually totally fine going for this endgame here. Down the exchange, up a couple pawns, and with plenty of weaknesses to attack, and a very mobile, connected passers on the D and C files. So queen takes b2. f6 is white's choice to break up this structure. This is another reason why I would have liked g6 a bit better, just keeping an eye on f5. And now queen d4 check. We see a trade, getting rid of these checkmating ideas for white. F takes g7, king takes g7. Now rook g3 is a check, king h7. And I won't bore you with all the endgame details here, but we will see that in the end, black managed to win by using these two pawns, getting the rook, and then winning up a full piece here. So another good game for Pavel Eljanov, another good game for the Caro-Kann. So what was the point of this game that I wanted to show? Well, this is more or less the main line of the advanced Caro-Kann that I've arrived at here. This is what, for a long time, the Grandmasters considered to be white's best chance at getting an advantage, and I just wanted to show that with some nuanced play, with this queen b6 idea, we're really not giving white any of what he wants. With this opening line, white wants to plant this knight on d4 and put some pressure onto this bishop on f5. Now with queen b6, knight c3, knight c6, we don't allow that. We simply take control of this square before white's knight ever lands on it, and this is going to be a pretty comfortable game for black. Other things to keep in mind, knight a4, this check, and now c4 from black is the idea that I'm recommending, with the plan of playing b5, b4 later, and invading on the queen's side, as we saw black do in this game. Once again, things to look out for, this king side attack. This is always, always, always going to have to be on your mind. You might get attacked. If white's really good, you might get attacked a lot, but do not fear. The Caro-Kann is not refuted yet. You should be able to hold if you play well. So c4, b5, b4, and a king side attack. That's what you can expect from this line in the Caro-Kann. Okay. For the last game of the day, I'm going to take a look at a game between Alexander Grischuk and Evgeny Bareev. This is another game in the advanced Caro-Kann, of course. e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5, and now knight to c3. Who is familiar with this line? Who knows what's coming up next? Who knows what white's idea is? I'll play one more move. I'm going to recommend e6, the most natural move for black. What's white's idea here? In the boring Caro-Kann. In the boring Caro-Kann. What is white doing with this move knight c3? I'll give you a hint. There are about 1,700 games in the database here. 1,695 of them have all continued with this next move. So this is the point. Someone in the chat says the move g3. I am going to assume that's a typo. Of course not g3, but g4. Hitting the bishop. This is the classic Shirov attack in the Caro-Kann. And longtime lecture followers, longtime Caleb Denby fans, will know I taught a lecture on this opening from the white side already. So now we're going to take a look from the black side in this game and see what black does to kind of counteract this pretty scary, pretty testing line from white. So g4 hits the bishop. We're going to drop this bishop back to g6. Now, h4 immediately is actually a little bit of a mistake. Who can find the best move for black after h4? Why is h4 a mistake? What's wrong with the move h4? There's something horribly, horribly wrong here. Terribly wrong with the move h4. Euclides. I believe I've actually done a game review on one of those games. If it hasn't come out already, it might have not. I'd have to double check. Look for that in the coming days. Yeah, there were some really good Caro-Kann games in the Tata Steel tournament. Yeah, of course, the chat has it now. h5 is a great move. The point of this move is it forces g5 more or less, and after g5, white's kingside attack is actually going to be completely dead. This is a crucial idea to keep in mind with both sides of this type of Caro-Kann opening, where if you lose control of the f5 square, if you've played both g5 and e5 as white, or if you can force your opponent to do this as black, it's going to be very, very good for the black pieces. You can now simply plant your pieces onto this f5 square. For example, knight e7, bishop e3, and now even knight f5 immediately is perfectly fine, and there's no way to open up files on the king's side for white anymore. You just simply cannot do it, which is why h4 is not the move in this game. Knight ge2 is the move, and the point is now, after c5, white plays h4. Of course, this allows the move h5. This is the line I'm going to recommend for black as well. I do want to stop, though, and talk about the move c5 once again before moving on to h4. Of course, white is going crazy on the king side. So what does black do? Well, it's the classic principled approach to chess. You counter an attack on the flank with an attack in the center. So look for black to be ignoring the king side as much as he can, and counterattacking in the center. Of course, you can't ignore the immediate threats on the king side in all cases, but this is kind of going to be the theme of this line. Black needs to strike back in the center in order to be fast enough to deal with this kingside pawn rush. So c5 immediately puts pressure. Now we see h4 from white, once again threatening to trap this bishop. So h5 from black. But what's different now for white? Well, now he doesn't have to play the move g5. He has this nice move, knight f4, hitting both of these things. Now, of course, if you capture this, white will capture on g6, and this is just absolutely terrible for black. Never play this. Instead, we need to save this bishop from capture, because this fracturing of the pawns is simply devastating. So the main move here is bishop h7, and this is the line I'm going to recommend as well. It's the line that Bareev played in the game. Now, the obvious downside to this is this pawn is now defended 0 times and attacked once, twice, even 3 times if you count the queen. So, of course, white can capture it, and that's what we see white do in this game. Now, if you've been paying attention, we're countering the attack on the king side with an attack in the center. So whenever white isn't making immediate threats that we have to solve on the king side, look for black to play in the center, as he does here. Pawn takes d4, immediately played. Now, white could recapture with the queen. This is a possibility. You would expect then just knight c6, bishop b5, and a move like knight e7. And things are actually calming down just a bit. You know, what black is finishing development, and this queen being on d4 doesn't really change much. Instead, white goes for a slight improvement here with the move knight b5, aiming to recapture on d4 with the knight, allowing this bishop some more freedom so it doesn't have to commit to the b5 square quite so quickly. Now knight c6 is the natural way to play, putting pressure in the center. We're counterattacking in the center. Keep that in mind. Knight takes d4. Now black simply develops with knight ge7 once again, and white plays a little bit of a sideline here. I will talk about the main move, which is c3. At this point, black has a few options. I'm actually going to recommend the most testing line, which is knight takes e5. Black goes up a pawn, and... Well, sorry, black doesn't go up a pawn. Black regains his pawn, except now he's traded his h5 pawn for an e5 pawn, which is going to be a favorable trade. So black now has way more control in the center. All he has to do is consolidate, get his pieces developed, and protect his king. So expect to see moves like bishop g5 here. Play a move like queen c7, stepping out of the pin, and perhaps this check could be played. This is one of the main lines. You can develop your knights finally. And white is going to go a little bit crazy on this king side, but black should be doing just fine here. Okay, that's not what was played in the game, though. Instead of c3 here, we see rook h3, and this is a pretty interesting way for white to play. Rather than just play the move c3, he's aiming to develop this rook and honestly put it anywhere on this third rank. There are situations when you could consider it being useful on b3, hitting b7. There are situations where it could be useful on f3, hitting f7. Even situations where if black dares to take this pawn, it could be useful on e3 with some potential sacrifices on e6. So rook h3, a really interesting move from Alexander Grischuk, just giving his rook a ton of options. The move a6 was played in the game, keeping an eye on this b5 square. Now bishop g5 comes on the board by whites, putting more pressure on the black pieces. But now simply queen b6 by Bareev, and black is getting developed. We see knight takes c6 played in the game, knight takes c6, and now after bishop d3, there is a trade of bishops. Not queen takes d3 rather, but rook takes d3 by Grischuk. And black is doing totally fine here. And black is doing so fine that perhaps he can actually get a pretty nice opening advantage here with the move queen takes b2. The idea being this pawn is hanging with check if white isn't careful, and black is just going to go up some early material. Now in the game, black was a little bit less ambitious, went for the move queen b4 check, which allows the move c3. This, of course, interferes with the queen's access to e5. We could still take on b2, but if we were going to take on b2, we should have done it on the previous turn. So now, Bareev's idea was actually just to play queen e4 check, and after rook e3, queen g2. Black can now even get a queen trade whenever he wants, and black is the one with the upper attacking hand. What more can you ask for from the Caro-Kann? Black is attacking. So rook c1 comes on the board. We see queen g1 check, king d2. Note of king e2. This, of course, is hanging, so king d2. And now black is taking on f2 as well. Rook e2, queen back to c5. And black has collected a pawn, and this king is looking a little bit silly on the d2 square. The game continued with queen a4, rook c8, rook f1, rook c7. A nice little maneuver to get some 7th rank defense. King c1 is finally tucking this king away in a square where it belongs. And now the move d4. And this is kind of the final position I really want to talk about in regards to the opening. This is a really nice way to break things open for black. As always, the theme of the game, once again, white attacks on the king side, black counterattacks in the center in the Shirov attack. And d4 is a classic example of that. He's not afraid to open things up in the center. That's where he wants to play. So d4 breaks down the white's king position, and this is an important break to keep in mind, not just in positions where there's a king on c1, but in other positions as well. This is how black can very nicely continue his play in the center. Gain control of d4 and then push that pawn forward. It's a really nice idea. Rook d1 was played in the game, creating a threat. Of course, this move would be a little bit devastating. Don't want to play like that. But now, though, simply rook d7 breaks this pin and breaks this pin. We see rook e d2, and now simply queen takes e5, and black has won the battle of the opening. He's won the center, and he's going to win the game as well. C takes d4 was played. Now we see queen e4, hitting some stuff, queen c2, simply f6 is forcing this bishop back, and now bishop d2, b5, queen takes a6, knight takes d4, and it's looking a lot like checkmate. Rook c8 check was played, king f7 tucks this king away nicely, knight g3, queen takes g4, rook g1, knight e2 check. See, knight takes, queen takes, and now after rook d1, bishop b4, and things are just falling apart, quite simply. Queen c6, we see a check, king c2, we see a check, king b3, we see a check, and resignation from Alexander Grischuk. So this is the last game that I wanted to go over here. King looks silly? Yeah, you got that right. So let's do a brief little review of this game, see what happened. There are a few key moments that I want to stress. So here, of course, white does not play h4, allowing h5. Knight e2 is his idea. You can only play h4 once you're sure that after h5, you don't have to play this move g5. This is the worst case scenario for white. So we see c5 now from black. You immediately counterattack in the center against the kingside attack. h4 makes an immediate threat, so black responds on the king's side. Now after the knight move, our bishop's hit, immediate threat on the king's side, so we respond. Now knight takes pawn, no immediate threat on the king's side, we take in the center. Knight b5, no threat on the king's side, we attack the center. Knight takes d4, no threat on the king's side, we develop a piece towards the center, right? Rook h3, and then the move a6. And you might say, well, how can a6 possibly be aimed at controlling the center? Well, you're preventing bishop b5, which would loosen your control of the center. So there you go. Bishop g5, queen b6, attacking the center. Knight takes, attacking the center. You're beginning to see a theme here, I hope. Bishop d3, bishop takes, now queen b4 check. When the best move was, of course, queen takes b2, attacking the center. And that's really the point of the Shirov attack here. White goes all out on the king's side as quickly as he can, but it's just not ever going to be enough because black should counter-attack in the center, where it matters. All right. Any last-minute questions on this Caro-Kann advanced variation? The point of this lecture is hopefully to get you fully ready for the advanced variation of the Caro. This is one of the most testing variations. It's one of the ones that gives black the most trouble, and I think I've gone over just about every hugely critical line that you absolutely need to know to get ready to play this. Other than that, thank you very much for watching this episode of Chess Openings Explained. Be sure to stay tuned now. I believe an episode of Tactics Time is coming your way, where it's going to be an interesting one. It's not going to be a normal chess one. I'm going to go over some tactics and variants. Get your brain to do some lateral thinking. Thank you all very much, and I will see you next time.